It's a really great pleasure to have the opportunity to engage with the Integrated Reporting US community today. And we meet at a time of real change, and change where we're hoping that we will end up with integrated reporting and integrated thinking finding a permanent home where they'll help to connect global financial reporting and sustainability disclosure standards. And those sustainability disclosure standards are where SASB standards will play such a huge role. And Neil and I are going to say a lot about that during the course of our presentation. But first, Neil Stewart is Director of Corporate Outreach at the VRF, and I'm the Chief Connectivity and Integrated Reporting Officer. And together we're going to provide some insights into the latest developments. And as Mary, you said, leaving plenty of time for questions and comments at the end. So in terms of this agenda, what we thought we'd like to do is really brief you on some of the recent initiatives relating to integrated reporting and integrated thinking, the work of the IFRS Foundation and ISSB, our progress at a technical level and the role of the integrated reporting framework and the SASB standards and our vision for the future. And then finally, what are the next steps and how should the community be preparing for what is to come? So the story begins in mid-2021 when two decade-old organisations, SASB and the IIRC, came together as part of a rationalisation of the corporate reporting landscape to form the Value Reporting Foundation. And in coming together and forming the Value Reporting Foundation, we created a tool set of 3 complementary resources that we believe support business and investor decision-making. And they're complementary because together, integrated reporting and the SASB standards provide a common language between the business community and the investor community about how value is created over time. And the next slide shows that the VRF is now home to the many regional and local integrated reporting communities. And we're really proud of this market-led feature of our work as an organisation. It ensures that what we do is dynamic. It's always responding to what the market is telling us. And our technical resources therefore remain relevant. And as we can test those resources with the integrated reporting communities, it means that they are constantly evolving. We're seeing that particularly now with new integrated thinking principles that have been released recently. So as you can see from this slide, these communities are really our window on the local adoption of integrated reporting, business practices in many parts of the world. And it's really valuable to us to have these communities as we seek new endorsement mechanisms in the future, and also ways of understanding and explaining best practice. And so as we listen to our communities who advised us some time ago, really, that a resource to support the implementation of integrated reporting was needed, we developed this practical guide for report preparers. And we're really pleased with this new implementation guide that is very much a companion document to the integrated reporting framework. And it answers the question of how you make the transition to integrated reporting and why you should. What are the motivations from a business perspective of moving towards integrated reporting? And that could be a clearer understanding of strategy, driving higher quality engagement, or better resource allocation. There are different motivations, and they're all explained in this guide. And it's been developed to be useful both to existing integrated reporting users and also those who are new to using the framework. So moving on, I mentioned how by bringing together SASB and the IIRC, we were combining 2 organisations with complementary resources. And we've recently released a report demonstrating just how this idea works in practice, how companies can use both the integrated reporting framework and the SASB standards together, whether that's to strengthen internal planning processes and help businesses to communicate their long-term value to investors. And our newest major product can be seen on the next slide, which is the prototype of our integrated thinking principles, which we're really proud of and excited by because they complete the 3 main resources of the Value Reporting Foundation: the framework, the standards, and now these integrated thinking principles. And they're designed to help reduce silo thinking and behavior within business practice, within organizations, and also demonstrate how boards and management are implementing the broader concepts of value creation in a strategic way. So that's what we've been doing as an organization, dedicated to improving the quality of disclosure and linking that high quality disclosure to governance, to strategy and long-term performance. But we don't operate in a vacuum. So the next slide shows that alongside all of this work as the Value Reporting Foundation, the IFRS Foundation had been consulting last year on whether to establish a new board to sit alongside the IASB to develop a baseline set of global sustainability standards relevant particularly to capital markets. And as you'll be aware, at COP26 in November, the IFRS Foundation made 3 announcements. They announced that they would establish formally the International Sustainability Standards Board, and that also the Value Reporting Foundation and the Climate Disclosure Standards Board, CDSB, would be consolidated within the IFRS Foundation, and that would provide the best running start on the standard development and also help to drive for the first time real connectivity between financial reporting standards and the new sustainability disclosure standards. And the first chapter was released at the same time in the form of 2 prototype standards, one on climate, because the ISSB is going to take a climate first approach, and a second general disclosure requirement standard in prototype form as well. And we'll see later that many capital market regulators and central banks endorse the ISSB at COP26. And so the momentum is really increasing around that, and Neil will say more about that later. The announcements were important, I think, for 2 reasons. Firstly, they created the institutional arrangements through the consolidations of the different organizations. And secondly, they laid the technical groundwork for the global sustainability disclosure standard setting organization for capital markets. And so the question that you might be asking is why? Why, after going through one consolidation in 2021, have we decided to double down on consolidation and agreed to consolidate with the IFRS Foundation? Well, for many, pretty much the same reasons that the IIRC and SASB merged. There's huge demand in the market for rationalization and simplification of the corporate reporting landscape. And we believe that there's a sense that we won't achieve scale for the standards and frameworks that we are responsible for until we put aside the differences within the corporate reporting system and work together, collaborate, and where we can consolidate. And as we've shown, by combining our resources as a VRF, we can not only scale the adoption of the resources individually, but also improve the positive impact of our resources on the world. And it's met with an overwhelmingly positive response. So now I'll hand over to Neil, who's going to introduce the ISSB and some of the key appointments and the role of the ISSB. Over to you, Neil.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thank you for setting the scene for us. And you know, when you think about the different organizations now coming together, the standard setters, the frameworks that are coming together to form the ISSB and joining with the IFRS Foundation, perhaps the one least familiar to this group of U.S. sustainability practitioners and corporate reporting experts might be the IFRS Foundation itself. And so to introduce you to who they are, that they're a nonprofit public interest organization. They set the IFRS, the International Financial Reporting Standards. They're used just about everywhere in the world, except for the US, where of course we have US GAAP, or generally accepted accounting principles. Now, what many people may not know about the IFRS Foundation is that it's overseen by a monitoring board of public sector authorities, led by the International Organization of Securities Commissions, IOSCO, and that's the Association of Securities Regulators, like the SEC. In fact, the SEC has a seat on IOSCO and on, of course, and also on the monitoring board of the IFRS Foundation. So IOSCO gives the IFRS Foundation a really explicit public mandate. Now, the ISSB is now set up as a sister board to the IASB, the International Accounting Standards Board, And that, of course, is the international equivalent of FASB in the US, both now governed by the extensive, the inclusive due process overseen by the IFRS Foundation. So what is this board doing exactly? Here's the mandate. It will develop a global baseline of sustainability disclosure standards focused on the information needs of investors through the lens of how sustainability issues impact enterprise value. And this global baseline approach allows different jurisdictions around the world to then add on additional requirements as needed, perhaps aimed at a broader group of stakeholders. And so this is referred to as the building blocks approach. So with the ISSB establishing the foundational building block, global standards, a global baseline for the financial markets that can then be used and built upon by jurisdictions around the world. So how will the ISSB work in relation to the IASB? So again, two independent but parallel standards boards, the IASB continuing to maintain the IFRS accounting standards for the financial statements, and then the ISSB issuing IFRS sustainability disclosure standards. Bit of a mouthful, but that's the proper name now for the new standards. That's for sustainability related financial disclosures. Now, very importantly, and this relates to integrated reporting, this allows sustainability disclosures and the financial statement to be better linked together, giving a comprehensive view of corporate performance to investors and other capital market participants. The Integrated Reporting Council remains intact and will advise the IASB and ISSB on connectivity between the boards and on connectivity between reporting of the financial statements and the sustainability related financial information. So connectivity through the fundamental concepts and guiding principles of integrated reporting. Now, for this group of I think US practitioners, I want to be very clear. The US doesn't use IFRS. We have US GAAP. So will US companies be able to use the ISSB standards? The short answer is yes. The ISSB standards can and will be used in conjunction with both IFRS or US GAAP. And the second point, global investors are expecting companies worldwide to report using the ISSB standards, regardless of what local securities regulators do. And the reason for that is simple. This is the next evolution of the SASB standards, of the TCFD recommendations, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, and of the Integrated Reporting Framework, all of which have tremendous momentum and support and following in the capital market. So certain jurisdictions, such as, for example, the UK or Hong Kong, have already signaled that they'll be establishing mechanisms to adopt into rulemaking the ISSB standards to make them mandatory for their companies to report to. No matter what different jurisdictions like they do, companies in other countries will be expected by their investors to start as soon as possible as well. So to bring us up to date then on the standards board, in mid-December, we appointed Emmanuel Faber as the chair of the ISSB. He's the former CEO of Danone, the multinational French food giant, and he has long championed the importance of sustainability information for the capital markets. Sue Lloyd has been appointed vice chair. She has been vice chair of the IASB, heavily involved in the development of the ISSB and in the technical work, the preparatory technical work that we're going to tell you about. And then, of course, our CEO, Janine Gilliatt, has been appointed as special advisor to the chair of the ISSB. And all three of these are fantastic appointments. Emmanuel bringing that global business perspective, Sue, the connectivity and the continuity with the IASB, and Janine with, before SASB, Janine was Chief Investment Operating Officer at CalPERS and was at Barclays Global Investors. So she brings this really strong investor and corporate perspective. And of course, she brings the perspective of the VRF, that is the SASB standards, the Integrated Reporting Framework, and Integrated Thinking Principles. And she brings the entire staff with her as well. The ISSB will be composed of 14 board members, ultimately, the majority of them full-time, a diversity in experience and expertise and geographical balance. And in addition to Emmanuel and Sue, who have already been appointed, 6 more board members will be announced quickly to give the board a quorum to be able to respond to the feedback to exposure drafts. And then the final 6 will be announced later in this year, giving the board really time to get that really complicated mix right in terms of background and geography and skills. So the IFRS Foundation now, with this development, has a real multi-location presence. The chair of the ISSB, Emmanuel, and his office is based in Frankfurt, in Germany. Montreal will host key functions. The IASB and of course our legacy IIRC staff are in London. The ISSB office in San Francisco will stay, and now discussions are underway for potential offices in Tokyo and Beijing. And note a very important point, that engagement with developed and emerging economies is a big priority for the IFRS Foundation. So the ISSB will be informed by expert advice from different consultative committees and advisory groups. So, for example, the Sustainability Standards Advisory Forum will mirror the similar group on the accounting standards side, and we will leverage the existing VRF advisory groups, including, as I mentioned before, the Integrated Reporting Council, but also the SASB Standards Advisory Group and the Investor Advisory Group, to continue to advise the IFRS Foundation and the ISSB. And exactly how that will look is still being determined as we go through our transition period. So that's the big picture about what's going on with the ISSB. And now that we've talked about the institutional arrangements, I'll tell you a little bit about the technical track and the work really of the Technical Readiness Working Group. So this group was in place for most of 2021. It was formed to develop technical recommendations for the ISSB, including prototype requirements that Jonathan mentioned have been published. Remember, these are recommendations only. They're now moving through ISSB due process, but the point was to give the ISSB a running start. So the TRWG brought in the resources of the existing standards and frameworks focused on the needs of investors. CDSB, the TCFD, the IASB, of course, the Value Reporting Foundation with Integrated Reporting Framework and SASB standards, as well as the World Economic Forum, bringing the Stakeholder Capitalism Metrics project. So, important point, the ISSB is not reinventing the wheel. They're using the best tools that are already in use in the market. All of the TRWG members are intent on simplifying the landscape. And of course, we're doing that by actually consolidating with the IFRS Foundation. But the TCFD, World Economic Forum, also strongly supporting the ISSB initiative and contributing their IP. So what were the deliverables of this group? 2 of the 8 deliverables were the prototypes that we talked about, and really those are really only 2 that have been put out into the public. But the other ones, the other work streams, are also very, very important, including, for example, conceptual guidelines for standard setting. That's to form the conceptual framework of the board, the architecture of the standards, which I'll go into in a moment, and very importantly for this group, that's work stream 8, and that's connectivity. The connectivity between the IASB, ISSB, the connectivity between the resulting disclosures, and that's where integrated reporting plays such an important role. So these are the 2 prototype documents published at COP26, one on climate, one general disclosure requirements, and they give an insight into the direction of travel for the ISSB. The climate prototype, you'll see, is very much built around the TCFD recommendation: governance, strategy, risk management, use of metrics and targets for climate risk, and the cross-industry metrics. But then, scope 1 and 2 greenhouse gas emissions, where material scope 3. But then you have the layer of industry-specific SASB standards that are climate-related for different industries, to then zero in on the industry-specific topics and metrics. Now, important point: the general disclosure requirements outline a consistent approach to the disclosure of all of a business's material sustainability-related risks and opportunities, and actually framed around the same 4 pillars from the TCFD and other related to the work of the Integrated Reporting Framework as well. But those pillars of governance, strategy, risk management, supported by metrics and targets. So the ISSB, while taking on climate first, it is not climate only. even from day one. So right from the start, the general disclosure requirements cover all sustainability matters relevant to a business. So the architecture work stream is very important. It really shows how today's alphabet soup is being combined and condensed into a more coherent whole. You can see the general requirements for disclosure. You can see the thematic requirements, such as climate, the industry-specific requirements that is built on the ISSB standards, and very importantly, the connection, the connectivity coming from integrated reporting, and all organized through, again, through those 4 pillars of governance, strategy, risk management, metrics, and targets. Now, a key question, an important question, what about the GRI? Perhaps it might be also framed, what about double materiality? This is a current discussion that's happening internationally. It's important to note that the ISSB under the IFRS Foundation is one component of a broader reporting system that will continue. So in our paper in September 2020, the group of 5 vision, laying out the vision for the future of reporting, we laid out this model of nested materiality, this graphic showing nested and dynamic materiality with the 3 layers of information. And I think this is worth going over again. So the smallest box, that's information currently in the financial statements. That's the balance sheet, income statement, and so on. That's the purview of the financial accounting standard setters. Then there's the broader set of information in the middle box. That's sustainability related financial disclosures. So reporting on the subset of sustainability topics material to enterprise value creation. That's the purview of the ISSB, and that's where ISSB has always lived. And then you have integrated reporting as the basis for connecting that traditional financial accounting with the broader sustainability information for investors. The even broader system of sustainability information is represented by the largest box, and that's the concept of multi-stakeholder reporting around sustainable development generally, and that's the purview of the GRI standards, which will continue to play a very important role. And our priority is to ensure that the ISSB standard and the GRI standards will be interoperable. That is, a company will be able to gather the data once, but then report in the right form and format to the different audiences that care about it. So that's some of our technical approach. And now Jonathan will talk us through the near term, the medium term, long term, what to expect as we consolidate into the IFRS Foundation.
Thanks, Neil, and for that great introduction on the technical work stream. So we'd like to just go a little bit deeper now into the planned consolidation and what it means for the ISSB standards and the IR framework. So first, if we look at the positioning of our resources within the IFRS Foundation structure, which this slide aims to do, what we see here is that the ISSB standards will fit neatly within the ISSB, providing the starting point for the industry-specific requirements that the ISSB will develop and issue. And the integrated reporting framework, Neil has said, will connect the traditional financial reporting with the new ISSB standards. And it is this connectivity that the framework will play. That's the role that the framework will play. And it will ensure a comprehensive understanding of how value is created over time and how the standards relate to the business model of an organization, the business strategy, and also the performance. So the effect of this is that the current voluntary nature of ISSB standards, TCFD recommendations, and the IR framework will now go through the IFRS Foundation and ISSB due process, as this next slide shows, in order to transition standards into standards and frameworks that are published by the IFRS Foundation. And then the next slide shows that from an integrated reporting perspective, the principles and concepts, including a broader perspective on value creation, capitals, and the business model, so all the fundamental concepts and guiding principles of integrated reporting will become embedded within the work of the IFRS Foundation. And the concept of connectivity, which is so embedded within the philosophy of integrated reporting, will help to drive the compatibility between the IASB and the ISSB's work. The current Integrated Reporting Council will transition into an advisory body to the IFRS Foundation on connectivity and integrated reporting practice. And joint projects have also already been identified. For example, how we more closely align integrated reporting in the IR framework with the management commentary, and then potentially over the longer term, combining them into a single resource that would sit as a bridge between the ISB and the ISSB. And then moving on to the SASB standard side, their industry-specific nature will add enormous value from day one and will be the starting point in the development of these standards. And they will go through, as Neil said, the ISSB due process as efficiently as is practicable. The SASB Standards Advisory Group will be transitioned into the ISSB to support the standard setting process. And then the SASB, the IAG, the Investor Advisory Group, will remain as well to provide strategic advice, advocacy, and it will also play a role in the standard setting process. And we've been really clear that we want more investor involvement in the development of the standards. So for both resources, the framework and the SASB standards, today our message is really clear in terms of adoption, that they should continue to be used by report preparers. And so Neil, on the next slide, we see here that in the short term, our message is one of no change. Continue to use the framework, the SASB standards, and all the TCFD requirements as usual. In the medium term, we're going to consult on the development of the standards, obviously, and also the connecting conceptual framework that will be based on the IR framework. And then our long-term vision is the streamlined landscape and a comprehensive global corporate reporting system. And that system for investors and capital market information will consist of IFRS sustainability disclosure standards, financial accounting standards, whether using IFRS or US GAAP, and a connecting framework for describing a company's governance, strategy, risks, and prospects. So that is what the long-term streamlined corporate reporting system looks like. So I'll hand back to Neil now, and I know that you're going to discuss, Neil, the response to these developments by the market and what the next steps are.
Indeed, thanks, Jonathan. And by the way, I'm pleased to see some really good questions coming into the chat, and we look forward to taking these up, including one from Erica Karp. So wonderful to see you here, Erica. In fact, you know, thinking back now, I think Erica was probably the one who first told me about the SASB standards all those years ago, as when she was a founding board member, and it's been such an amazing journey for the standards and for integrated reporting in that decade since I first met Erica. So looking now at the reaction to this announcement, it's been very, very strong and positive. You can see this picture just at COP26, central bank governors and finance ministers signing on to a statement of support and really showing that the ISSB standards are on track for adoption by jurisdictions around the world. We also had strong support from a broad array of stakeholders, investors to corporate CFOs, auditors, accounting firms, and investor associations, and so on. And you know, here's a bunch of quotes, but one of my favorites is from the CFO of DBS Group, Chung Suk Hui, and she said, what she said, I think really helps tie in integrated reporting as well, which is that the ISSB will enable preparers to narrate more coherently their integrated thinking on business models, sustainability issues, and financial outcomes. So summing up some of the goals of the ISSB. So again, just to reiterate what's going to happen next, remaining appointments of the ISSB board members, wait for those. Consultations on the two initial standards, the climate standard and the general disclosure requirement standard. They'll be coming out in exposure drafts, and we will be really working hard to educate the market and to seek the market input on those exposure drafts. Work to do to finalize the advisory group structure and how that will look going to the IFRS Foundation, and then of course offices to open multi-location model to set up, and the consolidation of our VRF team into the IFRS Foundation. The CDSB has already completed that. So advice then to report preparers: continue to apply the IR framework and SASB standards. They will continue to be used in the market as the ISSB moves through a period of transition, and including in transitioning the SASB standards into being industry-specific requirements. Also, the TCFD recommendations will continue to be important until the climate standards is fully gelled. Get familiar, if you want, with the prototypes now. They do indicate the direction of travel, though like I said, the exposure drafts will be out soon, and be ready to share your feedback. And for those of you at public companies, or in other roles, think about the ongoing engagement with the ISSB. Many large public companies have a really structured way to engage with accounting standard setting, perhaps through an accounting policy team or through their trade associations often. But it's now going to be very important to think then about allocating resources and time and team to engaging with ISSB standards development on an ongoing basis. Back to you now, Jonathan, to wrap up, and I think we're just about ready to take some questions.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Neil. And so in conclusion, I think there are really two types of acquisition that you see described: bolt-on acquisitions and transformational acquisitions. And Neil and I hope that when you see the developments that we've described today, that they represent the most significant change to accounting standard setting and company disclosure for capital markets in a generation. And we see it very much as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to help design and shape the future of the corporate reporting system, using the resources that many different organizations around the world have invested in over the last decade in order to bring to life very much as market-led developments. Are there going to be challenges? Of course, there are going to be huge challenges, and it's really through our engagement with stakeholders, including our country networks, that we understand the key issues and that we can feed them into our strategic thinking, particularly at this stage when we're still negotiating the details of the consolidation. Our leadership, our board, our management and staff are 100% behind the consolidation. And we believe very strongly that it advances the public interest. If you look at the needs of society, the environment, what capital markets and broader stakeholders are looking for. They want the capital markets to get involved in this transition to a more sustainable world, and capital markets need the information in order to allocate capital, in order that we can finance sustainable development goals and the other needs of our society and the environment over the long term. And it's time to really make that shift. It is a once-in-a-generation shift. Bring our capital markets, really the information capital markets, up to date and relevant to contemporary business. But it will, of course, represent compromise on both sides as we move over the line towards June and the completion of this consolidation. But as the old saying goes, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. And it's in that spirit that Neil and I are very happy to engage with you today and to answer any of your questions, your comments. Thank you very much. Back to you, Mary.